All right, I am happy to be joined with the President and Chief Science Officer of Tryp Therapeutics, Jim Gilligan joins us. How are you, sir?
Pretty good. Yourself?
I'm doing good, trying to stay warm. Looks like you got the same weather as I did. Let us see a little bit of snow in the background.
Yeah, a little bit. And we've got another 8 or 12 inches coming tomorrow and Thursday. So, but hey, it's the Northeast. That's okay.
Yeah. Florida on the horizon?
If I could travel, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Difficult times to say the least, but you make the most of it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, wanted to have you on. Fascinating story, obviously. Great performance as far as the company share price has been forming really well. But when we'll have a lot of people on within this industry, we want to get to know, obviously, the company itself, the people that are involved. And you're the chief, obviously, science officer in addition to the president. But as you build out this team, what do you look for when acquiring talent? Most importantly, what's your vision that you're trying to create within the psychedelic space for Tryp Therapeutics?
One of the things that we look for in our programs is scientific rigor and the ability to remove as much risk as possible. And it's not the risk associated with the drug per se, but it's doing all the right things in order to test it appropriately, to do it correctly in clinical trials, to be able to submit an IND to the FDA, and to do all the things necessary in this regulated industry to get a drug approved. So we've assembled a group of individuals who've been in the industry on average over 25 years,
right,
been successful in getting drugs approved. And so they have the requisite expertise to advance our program.
What is the things, I guess, you have a pretty obviously impressive resume to say the least. What do you think has interested you with regards to the psychedelic industry?
Well, it is interesting. I have a PhD in pharmacology and a background in drug discovery. And sometimes you look at things as a fad.
Yeah.
And you could state that, okay, the psychedelics might be considered a fad. But as I delved more into its mechanism of action and the clinical literature that exists already where it's been tested appropriately,
right,
became intrigued that it could represent a brand new avenue to treating some unmet medical diseases. And the more I looked, the more I was convinced that there was a clinical opportunity here.
Was there something specifically that you saw that really grabbed your interest?
Well, there were a couple of things. As with Tryp Therapeutics, we had an asset, Rhoxane, that's used for soft tissue sarcoma. That's an oncology asset, and it's more of a typical thing that I would look at as a pharmacologist. How does it work? How does it bring value? Mm-hmm. When you look at things like psilocybin, it's atypical.
Yeah.
And what I started to do was to look at the areas that Tryp is focused in. One being neuropathic pain, fibromyalgia, and the other is eating disorders. And as I looked into those areas, first, significant unmet medical need. They're not well served by traditional drugs. And secondly, it seemed that in both instances, the problem emanated from the brain, from the CNS. And so it seemed that this was an appropriate approach to try to address the cause or the origin of the disease rather than just the symptoms.
Interesting. So how does that work then? Like, where do you, I guess, come up with like the idea of, like you just explained, and then further to that, it's like, what do you think potentially psilocybin that you're focusing and concentrating a lot can, I guess, make those required changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of it is the fact that psilocybin has been in clinical studies more recently,
right,
in other areas like treatment-resistant depression. And if you look at some of the results from Robin Carhart-Harris, who is a consultant to Tryp,
mm-hmm,
showed really remarkable results for some patients who had failed prior pharmacologic intervention, who did not have their depression handled well. And his results were quite remarkable. And it showed that with the appropriate combination of psychotherapy and psilocybin, that particular instance, they got really remarkable results. And so that opened the door to think about what other areas
mm-hmm,
the brain be involved in actually responsible for the disorders that we look at.
right. Well, you've reached a milestone when it comes to your psilocybin drug manufacturing program. There are opportunities to quicken the process. One is by using what's called the Section 505(b)(2), which would advance you from a preclinical to a phase 2 clinical trial. For those that aren't familiar with the section 505(b)(2), maybe explain to us what is it and do you plan to use it?
Yeah, the 505(b)(2) affords a number of opportunities, and I've used that in my career to move drugs quicker through the clinic, obviously in a safe manner. But what you're able to do is leverage things that are in the public domain, from publications to other people's clinical studies that support most importantly, the safety of the molecule.
Mm-hmm.
Things I can say is in over 50 clinical studies, there's never been a serious adverse event reported for psilocybin. So that's a nice checkbox for the FDA. The other is the doses have been established, so we know what should be administered. And so that gives you a leg up. You don't need to do the standard preclinical to figure out how the molecule works. You don't need to do a lot of the initial pharmacology and toxicology studies because they've already been performed. So it affords you the opportunity to move directly into the patient population to test your hypothesis.
Makes sense. Well, one of the gentlemen that you talked about earlier was Dr. Robert Cahart Harris, and recently was added on as an advisory within the actual company of Tryp Therapeutics. This is a world-renowned research doctor pertaining to psychedelics. What do you think that he brings to the table? Most importantly, I guess, how did the conversations begin? And what do you think intrigued him the most about your story specifically?
Well, he's a tremendous asset for us.
Right.
In addition, one of the things that's interesting about this particular drug development program is it's not just a simple drug or molecule.
Mm-hmm.
Integrated with psychotherapy, and they need to be performed hand in hand. And Robin Carhart Harris has a lot of experience on the psychotherapy aspect and how to conduct it and what the appropriate approach is. And so we realized, even though our team has tremendous experience on the drug development side, what we lacked was that insight into,
right.
Into the psychotherapy component. And so we approached Robin to seek his advice and see if he'd be an advisor. And what he recognized in our group was that it was a good marriage, right? We knew the drug discovery side, the drug development side, and he knew the psychotherapy. And when you combine the two, it improved both of our ability to take a drug successfully through clinical development.
So I guess when you look at the drug development in the psychiatry side, how, if you're new to the space, you're trying to obviously understand what certain companies are doing, how important is that? And does he end up fast forwarding the company's narrative based off of that?
Yeah, I think he's be a tremendous asset. As I mentioned, part of what we need to do is we want to customize the psychotherapeutic approach. We want to provide a holistic approach for the patient that provides them the highest likelihood of success.
Right.
Many of these patients, for example, with fibromyalgia, they just haven't had success with existing drugs. And so our attention to detail, and by having him help us design the therapy aspect, just increases the likelihood that we'll have a positive outcome. So you could have the drug could actually work, but due to not performing things in an appropriate fashion, you could not get the results that you want. And having Robin help us, assist us, decreases risk and increase our likelihood of success.
Yeah, you can't say that enough, because I'm curious to know, as we learn more and more, and there's a lot to learn, managing, I guess, you obviously want to help out the patient. That's the first and foremost thing. When you look at this business in general, I asked this to James actually a couple of weeks ago. Do you see this industry potentially changing the healthcare system?
I think that one of the things that we're doing at Tryp and other companies are starting to think of is taking a rigorous scientific approach. And we're looking at this from the way you develop an ethical pharmaceutical. So you're really looking at all the details. You're controlling every aspect. So when you come to the final conclusion, you have faith in what you were able to attain, and you can reproduce it. You want to make certain that the success you have in the clinic will now be able to be transferred to when people are using this after it's approved to provide clinical benefit. And I think that being a little more conservative and taking your time and doing it correctly and exploring things more thoroughly, it helps both sides, both the outcome for the patient, and as a corporation, likely that we'll have success.
How much does it mean to you to be part of this story that's unfolding? Because what an incredible, fascinating industry, and the people I speak to, and I'm sure you can understand and relate as well. It truly is a fascinating industry, and there's a lot of changes that obviously need to be made.
Yeah, I think that, one of the cultural aspects where people look at psilocybin and think about the recreational use. And so we need to overcome that. And I think our approach with the sound scientific regimen to look at these things provides that credibility that we're really looking at this the way you would look at any other drug discovery program. And I think it's also important because the more we learn in our clinical studies, it might make it easier to explain to doctors and patients where the benefit is derived from. And by the attention to detail and looking at some of the metrics we expect to look at in our clinical studies, we'll be able to explain to people why we think it's going to be beneficial and why they should even consider getting involved in a clinical study to begin with.
Right. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, an incredible research team that you're building out. It all starts from the top, and you're right at the top, obviously, there, and some great appointments, obviously, with Dr. Harris that we touched on recently. I applaud you for you and your team, what you're doing. Keep up the great work, and please keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you for the time. Appreciate having the opportunity to explain what Tryp is going to be involved with and our road to success.
Yeah, indeed. Jim, appreciate it. Take care and stay warm.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Take care.